Okay, great. So we're here today to talk about how to put an Excel front end on your model. Please feel free to use the chat for questions because I'm going to have people muted. And I'll get to the questions as I go. But in essence, what you're trying to do is use the power of TreeAge Pro to create a model that may be quite complicated, but then put it in the hands of someone potentially who doesn't know how to use TreeAge Pro, has never used TreeAge Pro, but potentially wants to be able to use Excel as a front end for that. So we're going to look at how you could put an Excel kind of skin on top of a TreeAge Pro model, and then how that be usable by someone that doesn't know TreeAge Pro that well. Now we're going to use some models that are very similar, but not exactly the same as the ones you find up here in your files view under example models, special features, Excel. These files and these models in here, slight variations on those. But if you ever wanted to do it yourself and have an example, you have these, and it's also described in the help. There's a whole chapter dedicated to creating these kinds of links between a TreeAge Pro model and Excel. But we're not going to use those models. I'm going to use a couple of models that I have here. And one of them is this Markov cancer decision before, and the other one is Markov cancer decision by links. This is the one that already has the connections. This one does not. Okay, so I'm just going to put them side by. Well, they're both Markov models with two strategies, standard cancer training model that we use a lot. But the primary difference, and I'm going to take this one and put it over to the side over here so we can look at them side by side, is in this model here, all the parameters are internal. They're defined right here at the root node with a variable definition. And when you run the model, it's going to use those parameters and generate your rankings, meaning your average cost and effectiveness per strategy, incremental values, and the ICER. And you see that also down here, all the variables are defined with numbers, all those parameter variables. When we move over to the one that already has the BioLink set up, you'll see that these numbers are not present in the model itself. And you see over here, the variable definitions refer to this BioLink name. Well, what does that mean? What that means is that those parameters are actually pulled from cells in this specific workbook. Right, so you have a named cell here, C local SOC, right? That is 20,000. That's the equivalent of this 20,000 that's already in the model. Okay, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how that's already set up, and then we'll go back to the model that doesn't have anything set up, and we'll add a couple of those BioLink connections so you can see how that works. So if I look at the one that already has it set up, and I go to tree preferences, specifically under a setting you may not have looked at. You probably spent a lot of time up here, but you maybe never have looked at this spreadsheet dynamic links, and you see it's connected to a workbook, an Excel workbook that's in the same folder as the model, and that has these connections already set up in it. Now, this one's rarely used, so we won't talk much about that. But these are used. This one's used extensively, and this one a little bit less so. But these are taking inputs. I know it says outputs, but they're outputs from Excel. They're really inputs to the model that are in these named cells. And this is the value that's actually coming from Excel. And then it's set up with this particular BioLink name or BioLink number. And then back here in my model, if I cancel this, I can refer to it by BioLink name C local new. And that is a connection directly to this C local new cell in Excel. So if I change this value here, which I'll do a little bit later, it actually changes the results of the model when I run the analysis. Now, let me go back into tree preferences for a second. So those are all the inputs, right? There are also model outputs, and these are payoffs, meaning, the output from the model, payoffs are outputs, and I've got the mean, cost, and effectiveness from each of the two strategies for 4 primary outputs from the model. And those can be sent specifically to cells within the Excel model. So back to Excel for a second. You see, I've got these cells. Now, we've got the cell name here as a label, just to remind you, the cell's actually named here. Each of these cells is an input on the input sheet. And each of these cells, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one, are on the output sheet, and those are going to come from the TreeAge Pro analysis. So I've got inputs in Excel, I've got outputs in Excel. Okay, now and then the last thing that's already done in this one is this button, and this button will actually run the analysis, go back to TreeAge Pro, run the analysis, and then get the new results based on the new inputs, input values, I should say. Now, rather than just kind of assume that you know how to build those, I'm going to go back and actually add some of these to the one that doesn't have it. So let's just move this back here. Okay, so here's my my one that doesn't have the inputs yet. And I would go to tree preferences, and I'm in the dynamic links section, and I would browse. I want to find the Excel workbook. Come on. And I'm just choosing this number 2 because I don't want to link both models to the same workbook. There are macros in it, so I have to enable them. And now I'm in a position where I can start to add the by links, the 2 direction. Again, we don't really need this one. So I'm going to say add, and it says, okay, see local new. That could be my first one. And that preview came from Excel. And I could add another one for see local standard of care. That also came from Excel. Okay. Now, once those are set up, then what I would do, oops, I hit cancel. Sorry about that. I got to do that one more time. I didn't mean to cancel. Okay, I'm going to add 1, add 2. And this time I'll hit apply and close. And now back in the model, I could take these defined values that are in the model, and I could replace that with the function by link. You can do it by index or by name. It's a little bit easier if you do it by name. These name row and column, that would be if the name cell was actually a range of cells. You could pick different elements of that range, but I just need this by link name. And then in the middle, you just put the name of the by link in quotes. So this one would be C local SO, or new rather. And then if I wanted the other one, this C local SOC, that would be, I'll just type it, by link name C local SOC, close quote, close parentheses. And now if I ran this model, those 2 parameters are no longer internal to the model. They would actually be coming from Excel. Now on the output side, we'll go back to tree preferences, same place. And I would add these post analysis results. And when I say add, it's just gonna, it's gonna give me some options. Yeah, sure, I want cost, good. And I want the mean cost, that's good. For the strategy, this should be the standard of care strategy, but I definitely don't want to point this to my input parameter. I would come down to these cells in Excel and say, okay, that's my standard of cost output standard of care. It'd be nice if I had a little more space here so you can see it. So now I've got my payoff 1 mean for the standard of care strategy linked to an output cell in Excel. And I would do it again for the second strategy, except now I would point it to the output new. And I'm not going to set them all up because I've got 6 or 7 or maybe 8 or 9 of these and 4 of these in the other model that are already done. So I'll go ahead and apply and close, but now I'm going to go back to the model that already has them all set up. And you see here are all the inputs and all the 4 outputs. Really, they only have 2 strategies, cost and effectiveness, so 4 outputs. And then this thing should function, right? So if I run rankings on this model, right, it's generating these values from the inputs that are here, back here. And it's sending the outputs, the 436, 468, and 10.95 and 1152, to these cells and these cells. Okay. And then and if I change that model input, let's say I change this to 24,000 and I run it again, go back to the model and run it again. Now my ICER before was in the 50,000. Now it's 75,000 because this cost has gone up. I only changed one cost that only affects one strategy. All the other outputs are the same, but now my ICER is different. Not just internal to TreeAge Pro, but back here, I'm getting that new ICER too, reflecting the new value from the changed inputs. So that's how you connect the values, the input values to the model, the output values from the model through the by links. But there's one more thing that I want to show you, and that is the ability to actually run the analysis from Excel. So you actually never really have to do anything other than open up the model. And that last one, I'll go back to the one that doesn't have this stuff ready already and go back to the Excel that it was connected to. And you'll see this TreeAge Pro menu. Now that should be activated if you have our Excel add-in from TreeAge Pro, Excel add-in I should say, set up. And then you can go up here, and the first thing I would have to do is create a stored analysis, which I already should have, but just in case you have never done that before, you run your analysis, you go back to your model, you go to analysis, stored analyses, and you can save that analysis. Now it's already been saved once, I'll save it again. Rankings 2. And what that's doing is it's saying, okay, this is the analysis I ran. Now rankings doesn't really have any options, so it's not, you know, so necessary to do these other than for this purpose. But if it were a Monte Carlo simulation, it would remember all the things that you did. If it were, let's say, probabilistic sensitivity analysis or microsimulation, if it's microsimulation, how many patients, all that stuff would be stored within the stored analysis so that it's easy to execute either from within TreeAge Pro or outside TreeAge Pro. So now we've got our stored analysis, and I could go back to Excel, right? And go here and go to the stored analyses, and I could add a button for this. And this option is like, do you still want to run it in TreeAge Pro or do you not want to run in TreeAge Pro? If you uncheck that button, it will only run it and send them analysis back to Excel. It won't actually display the output. So I don't really care what it is for now. You assign the button, and now you have a button to run that. Now I'm going to go back to the model that's complete, that has all the parameters, so we can see that in action. Okay, so we'll come back here to the one that has the by links, right? This is all set. It has its own Excel that's set up, connected to it. So now I have everything I need here for the sorry about the mouse coming in and out. For the front end, I can go back to model inputs, and I can change this to 25,000, and I can change, you know, this probability to say 0.03, and change this to 0.865, whatever. And then if I come back here and run the rankings, it's going to get totally different results. And you see a lot of things have changed now because I didn't just change a cost, I changed cost and some probabilities and some utilities, and I'm getting new values. And if I go back and change things again, let's say 30,000 and 0.02, go back to the model input outputs, hit the rankings button again, and it generates new results and a new ICER. So there's kind of two elements to this. There's the setting it up, which may potentially something that you would do. And then there's the running it, which is something that maybe your audience would do, which is really just change some values, hit the button, and generates new output. And that's pretty much it. It's just trying to I'm just here to try to give you the ability to put this kind of front end on your model for somebody else. And you could even use this for your own model. Let's say you have colleagues that want to manipulate the parameters, and they don't have TreeAge Pro. You could just send them the worksheet. They could change some parameters and say, I'd like you to run it under this scenario. You get the Excel back, you put it back in the folder, and run the analysis for them. So there's all kinds of things you could do with that, but we had it requested from us to be able to put a front end of Excel front end on it, and so we did that. So I think my presentation is complete, but I'm open to questions as anyone might have. You can use the chat to issue any questions that you might have. In fact, you may have already done that. I didn't check. I guess no chat so far. Does anyone have any questions about anything that I covered or anything they'd like to see? Okay, we have a semi-silent group today, but that's okay. That's okay. But I'll keep this open in case somebody has a question. Okay, well, I guess there are no questions. The one thing I would mention before we break is that you'll be able to see a recording of this on our website in a couple of days. The other thing is we are always this came from a request from people who use TreeAge Pro. They wanted this functionality to be able to put this in front of a model. We are always looking for new ideas. So if you have any thoughts, you can contact me directly through at amunzer@treeage.com. That's AMUNZER @treeage.com, or send a request to support, even if it's not support, which is just support@treeage.com. A little easier to remember, and we will try to incorporate your ideas into kind of future versions of the software. Because just so you know, we do put out a new version every 6 months, so we always have at least a few new cool things and or improvements in those releases. So there'll be another one coming out in July, and that will include a price sensitivity tool. So, and eventually we'll do a webinar on that. So anyway, thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate your time. Again, if you have any questions moving forward or any thoughts, I'm very, very eager to hear them. So thank you and have a great day.